Joining us right now, Alameda County Supervisor Keith Carson is with us right now talking about the death of George Floyd, the new developments we've learned today, and also the new developments that's now coming out of Alameda County with regards to a curfew now being placed. Supervisor, thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thanks for having me.
First off, just can you talk a little bit about the planning and the thought process that went into announcing the curfew? A number of other cities had already announced them. Oakland, Alameda County, kind of on the fence for a few days. What finally triggered that decision today?
Well, the sheriff, Greg Ahern, has declared a curfew, which I guess goes into effect later on today. Unfortunately, diverting attention away, just like the vandalism which is taking place and the destruction which is taking place, diverting attention away from what was the death or what is the death of George Floyd. Nobody is talking about that at this point in time. Most of us have forgotten who Derek Chauvin is, the police officer who murdered George Floyd. Most of us are not talking about Ahmaud Arbery. We're not talking about Eric Gardner, Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, Oscar Grant. We can go on and on. 30 years ago, it was Rodney King. We're not talking about that at this point. We're talking about a curfew, and we're talking about destruction of property, and we're talking about vandalism, all of which are important, but we're forgetting the main thing that has brought us here, and that's the anger that people are feeling, demonstrating the anger around the embedded racism that exists in this country and has existed for Black people since we've been here.
Supervisor, what is the takeaway there in Alameda County right now? Obviously, a lot of people are feeling emotional. They have to feel pain. Obviously, you are feeling it as well. What is the takeaway from people right now that you've been able to talk with across Alameda County and in Oakland as well?
Well, the takeaway is that we know that since African Americans have been to this country, brought here as slaves, unpaid labor for 400 years in this country, the decimation of our families by way of breaking up our families, treating us as though we weren't human, making sure that our educational system and our history is not a part of our real, not taught in schools. The suppression of all of these things, the racism that exists not only within the police department, which is demonstrated on a regular basis, but the racism that comes out as a result of us trying to apply for a loan or find homes, or in our educational system, which is underfunded in the Black community, which is underserved in the Black community. All of these things, which was systemic in our country. We're not talking about those things in a substantive way. And I think what we're seeing now is the anger being displayed by individuals that say they don't care anymore. They don't care anymore because of the fact that they see that their parents weren't listened to. They see that when in the 60s, when Bull Connor brought out the dogs and sicked them on 2,500 children who were peacefully demonstrating, that this country really doesn't care about that.
I'm not sure if you were able to hear Governor Newsom speak earlier this afternoon. He has a pretty powerful message. At least I thought he was that he did. One of the things that really stuck out with me was his opening line saying that we are in this position because of not the Black community, but because of white Americans. Is that something that you believe, that we are in this position not because of African Americans in this country?
We did not create this situation as African Americans, to be very honest with you. Today, we're reacting yet again to these occurrences. 30 years ago, I actually hosted a rally of 1,000 people right outside the doors of the administration building that I have the privilege to serve in here at the county, around the beating of Rodney King, which we saw on video. In 30 years, obviously last Monday at this time, we saw that still exists with the death, the murder of George Floyd. And so while we see these things being acted out as a result of video, as a result of pictures, as a result of history. What we're not really talking about is the systemic racism that unfortunately goes between blacks and whites in particular, but unfortunately it's whites and other people of color in this country systemically. And again, when you go to try to get a loan and it's not an equal loan and you live in an area that is redlined and that the schools are not adequately funded, that there's not fair and equal employment that takes place, and that generation after generation sees this happening, and it's been more than 400 years that it's been happening. You can clearly see why these young people, unfortunately, today are saying they don't care anymore, that they're displaying their anger.
Supervisor, do you think with the death of George Floyd, you listed off a number of names, Terrence Crutcher. We just learned that today that Breonna Taylor, the police chief in
Yes.
Louisville, has been fired because of lack of protocol. The officer didn't turn on his body camera with regards to her death. You listed off a number of names. What's happening right now? Does that feel different to you, to where people really are sitting up, paying attention, really absorbing in, taking in the moment of what is happening?
Until we honestly start to talk to each other about all of these ongoing incidences, and again, they're very prominent in law enforcement, they're very evident in law enforcement, they're very systemic in law enforcement, but they're just as systemic in the other fabrics of our community, the other operations in our community. When you know that there's a lot of construction going on in this community and you don't see Black people at work and they don't see their fathers going off to work, even holding up the signs of caution, drive slowly in an area that development is going on. When you know that the schools that you're going to are completely, that the teachers are doing the best that they can, but they are underfunded, that you don't have the same equipment that they have in a white school to learn. When you are trying to get housing, even today, and you're unable to get housing, and that people are treated honestly and fairly, these are things we really need to talk about. We don't talk about them in schools because they're no longer taught in our history classes. And so when these things take place, it means that each of us has to say something about it in that respective area. We could talk to each other first to try to educate and inform, and after that, you need to point it out. You need to be very open and out front about it, regardless as to whether it's regarding law enforcement, which is again being chronicled on a regular basis, or whether or not it is in the other fabric of the system. So when Blacks see that clearly, since we've been here, that the same conditions exist, you can understand the anger that people are having. Now, I don't support the vandalism. I don't support the destruction, but we really have to admit that there's anger here, and it's honest anger. And until we deal with that anger, we can't have peace without patience. If we have peace, then we can't be patient about that.
Yeah, it's a very tough conversation to have. So many people reluctant to have it. How do you begin to build that dialogue? How do you bridge that gap to where that conversation can be had, and to where one side or the other isn't feeling some type of way about it?
I don't really have an answer to that. And the reason I don't have an answer to that is because we've had this same conversation every time there's an incident that takes place. And after a while, we go back to our normal lifestyle. I think it's incumbent upon each and every one of us, not just your elected officials, where a lot of this, the fabric, the structure of what we live in is a result of policies that are made in Washington, and policies that are made at the State House, policies that are asked to be carried out at the local level. We have a responsibility in that. I have a responsibility in that. But if you work in the banking institution and you see that people don't honestly get a loan that they deserve, when you're seeing that kids are uneducated in an equal way, or unable to get into higher education in an equal way, then you have a responsibility to point that out and say that in that when people can't find adequate housing and equal housing, even though they have the means to pay for that housing because somebody's discriminating against them. When you see people are walking innocently into into Target store to purchase something, and then all of a sudden, because of the race, your color, being black, that you're followed, and as for no other reason than because of your race and the fact that you're a young black person, then you need to call it out. And that person needs to be calling it out right in that instance. It's not just the area that we're talking about now, which again goes back to the death of George Floyd. You know, unfortunately, again, I don't condone the violence. I don't condone the vandalism that's taking place. These are buildings that, again, at some point in time, especially those that have corporate headquarters that are located someplace that will be back in business. George Floyd will never again be able to breathe. Armand Arbery, again, will never be able to breathe. Oscar Grant will never be able again to breathe. Rodney King was beat like a savage individual, of which he wasn't. These things should be unacceptable to everybody, not just passively, but they should be a part of the structure of trying to correct this.
It is a pattern that has definitely gone on far too long. Supervisor, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Peace, not patience.
Thank you.